sensory bins. Have you ever used them in the classroom? Maybe you know your students would benefit from that extra sensory play, but you're not sure how to make it work, especially when you are so focused on your students' academic IEP goals and objectives. If that sounds familiar, you are in the right place. Hey, special educators, it's Jennifer from Positively Learning, and in this episode, I'm going to be sharing how I fit in sensory play into our already jam-packed day. Hey, special educators, I'm Jennifer from Positively Learning. Welcome to the Special Educators Resource Room. If you're like me, you're always looking for ways to save time and streamline your work. That's why this podcast was created, to give you the systems and solutions you need to get your time back. Tune in for tips, tricks, and tools that will help you manage your workload and make the most of your time. Whether you're brand new or experienced, all are welcome in the Special Educators Resource Room. I'm so glad that you're here listening along. This is the fourth in a series of episodes called How Do I Fit It All In? We've been focusing on all of those things our students really need and would benefit from. However, they are not part of our regular schedule. We talked about social emotional learning, fine motor, especially when our students just miss qualifying for OT services. Last episode, we talked about incorporating more movement into our everyday learning. And today, we're going to be talking about sensory. I don't know about you, but when I look back and reflect on the things that really worked in the classroom, they often followed a period of desperation and trial and error. It wasn't when things felt easy. And this definitely applies to sensory. Let's travel back in time to a school year where I worked with a very special group of students who had a variety of sensory input challenges. And they all presented in a very different way. So it was not a one size fits all. Initially, I thought I was pretty prepared. I'd spent a lot of time thinking about how I could incorporate more multisensory learning experiences, especially in the form of independent work systems. And that was great, but it was not enough. I also had brain breaks that I felt were capturing more of the five senses. In fact, I used this graphic organizer and it just had 5 spaces for the 5 senses. And I would run through the activities that I knew were developmentally appropriate. I would run them through this graphic organizer thinking about how many different ways and how many different senses we could incorporate. I thought I was pretty prepared, but nothing really prepares you, right? So my students loved these activities. However, they were not enough. It's not like they could turn on and off their sensory needs to match our schedule when we did these activities. In fact, I learned pretty quickly that if I was not providing the sensory experiences in a developmentally appropriate way, my students were going to seek out these experiences, and it might not be something that was appropriate for the classroom. So this was the challenge that I had to figure out right away. I could do an entire episode on everything that we tried out and the results. For the most part, many of these sensory activities were a huge hit, but they either quickly faded away or they just didn't incorporate all of those other things that we were focusing on. And for my students, that was language skills, early reading skills, and even math skills. For the sake of time, I want to focus on the one activity that really worked for all of us, gave us the most bang for our buck, and that was incorporating sensory bins into our daily learning. Now I'm going to share exactly how we used them, how they supported my students' goals, and the logistics of setting them all up. It was late September, early October, and I was searching Pinterest for sensory play activities. Most of my information came from finding websites that were geared towards parents of toddlers. Maybe these were water, sand play activities, or sensory bins you might use in the summer outside. I wasn't finding many classroom activities, and there weren't sensory bins on TPT at the time. I found so many neat sensory ideas that I knew my students would absolutely love. The one question I had in my mind is, how do I incorporate academics simultaneously? Because it's not like we had extra time. Here's our solution: sensory bin stories. What I did is I ended up using the read alouds that I was already going to be using in the classroom, and matched them with a sensory experience. I came up with 36 of these read alouds, and I created 36 sensory bins to match them. So here's exactly what it looked like. Our reading intervention groups met every single day. On Monday, I introduced our read aloud for the week. Now, we did read alouds every day, often more than once a day, but this book was the one book that we were going to dig deeper into every single day. I'm going to use the example of the rainbow fish, but I did set this up for 36 different books. Now, at the time, I was choosing high quality literature that was appropriate for my students. I was also choosing books that I had access to, whether it was the hard copy I had inherited or already had in my classroom library, something I could get from the library, or even YouTube. I'll add a link to the show notes. You can see all 36 books. Titles include Chicka Chicka Boom Boom, The Kissing Hand, Where the Wild Things Are, Polar Express, Officer Buckle, and Gloria, A Bad Case of Stripes, all of those classics. On Monday, we read the new book, and I introduced the sensory bin. We used a plastic airtight container. You definitely want to have a lid. I preferred the Rubbermaid containers that had a latch lid. You don't want the sensory bin to be too large. My goal was to have 3 to 4 students be able to sit around the bin on the floor comfortably. If this bin was too tall, my students would have to be on their knees, leaning forward to dig in, and I could just imagine them knocking their heads. So you want it to be pretty shallow. You also don't want it to be too large, or you're going to really have to search for a lot of materials to fill up the bin. So think quart size versus gallon. On Monday, we would read the book and enjoy the book, and then out comes the sensory bin. This is an adult supervised activity. Inside the sensory bin, I would put task cards that would match the story we just read. For literacy, these different task cards could include letter cards that match the sensory bin activity. In this case, it was rainbow fish. So imagine rainbow fish cards for all the uppercase and lowercase letters. I also included 15 vocabulary words from the story. The rainbow fish had such a great selection, like sparkling and shimmer and glittering and ordinary. I organized these all on a teacher cheat sheet, and I organized the vocabulary words by number of syllables so you can get some extra practice with that. I also put in high frequency words from the story. And my favorite activity for this group of students I worked with was pulling out a mentor sentence. In this case, for the rainbow fish, the mentor sentence was, "And the more he gave away, the more delighted he became." I put this on a sentence card. I also put it on individual word cards with punctuation. Each day in our small groups, we would revisit the story and focus on a different aspect. It was very easy to differentiate with the sensory bin. I had students using the letter cards for letter recognition or matching uppercase to lowercase. We were using the letter cards to build the vocabulary words or the high frequency words. We were using the word cards to build the mentor sentence. And of course, there's the sensory play aspect. I put some extra sorting mats so students could explore the materials. It was amazing to see all the different ways that students explored the sensory bin. Some students just wanted to dive in and touch all the things. Other students were more hesitant, maybe observing a bit longer before focusing in on one item. For the rainbow fish, the foil pieces might be what's attracting their attention. What types of materials did I put in the sensory bins? Well, I got pretty creative. I wanted to use things I either already had or had easy access to. It didn't always work like that, but I got better and better as time went on. Here's a few pointers for getting started. Think of items as sizes: small, medium, and large. You can start looking around your classroom and see what you already own. For the rainbow fish, I wanted to focus on the colors blue, purple, and green. So I could look at any building blocks that we had, Duplo Legos, those larger kind, and the largest size pom-poms. And I can start putting those into the box. Next, I want to think of the medium size items. Again, I'm looking at blue, purple, and green for the rainbow fish. Do I have any math manipulatives like the blue and green pattern blocks or snap cubes or those math chain links or maybe regular size pom-poms? The large items are adding the bulk to the bin, and the medium items are adding a little bit more sensory variety. Now let's think about the small items. These are the items that could be specific to the read aloud theme. I made the mistake of spending a lot of my time, energy, and money on these small items, but I quickly learned that you do not have to. These small items are going to sink straight to the bottom, so you just need to put a handful. For the rainbow fish, I chose foil to make foil scales. And I wanted to think about things that were glittery, shiny, metallic. So I was putting in sparkly pom-poms and some different beads and gems. I also added a handful of small fish mini erasers. You definitely do not need to be spending extra money here. In fact, I started shopping the classroom. I grabbed a box of plastic food storage bags and organized resources by color. So I was pulling out small, medium, and large items that were all blue or all green or all red. If I was grabbing items that were all brown, I could reuse them for Where the Wild Things Are or Corduroy or Owl Moon. Then I would set up the bin and add a few of those small items. For Owl Moon, I added some owl mini erasers and some feathers. For Corduroy, I added these little pieces of green felt for Corduroy's overalls. It was so much fun to add these small little items, and it didn't break the bank. We talked about all of the literacy task cards, but I also created math task cards to go with each set. So I have numbers 1 through 15. I have these numbers represented by pictures. Students could either grab the numeral card or the 10 frames and use the sensory items for one-to-one correspondence. I also add a set of number bond cards for students who are ready. And that's what's so great about these sensory bins. It's easy to differentiate to meet students' needs. Now, beyond the early literacy and math skills, I've also included sensory learning mats. These could easily be inserted into dry erase sleeves. Students could dig into the sensory bin, pull out any materials, and sort by size or by color. I could go on and on, but I'm looking at the time and it's getting pretty long. So I'm going to leave a link in the show notes for you to check out these sensory bin stories. Each packet includes specific information for a read aloud book. There's the vocabulary words, high frequency words, all of the different task cards. I also put in a cheat sheet for gathering the materials divided by small, medium, and large. The idea is that if you are using these every single week, that you're going to be able to reuse a lot of these materials. It just takes some shopping in your classroom and a little organization. Let me know if you have any questions. I feel like I could come back and do a whole part 2. But for now, I thank you so much for listening. Check out the show notes, and I'll see you next time in the Special Educators Resource Room. Thanks so much for tuning in, and I'm dying to ask, what'd you think? Be sure to hit the follow or subscribe buttons so that you never miss an episode. You can find the show notes and links for everything mentioned in this episode at positivelylearningblog.com. See you next week for more special education solutions.